Okay, well, I have 1 o'clock, so I think it would be best if we went ahead to get things started. So welcome back everyone from lunch. We had a nice break. Hopefully everybody had a chance to get some lunch and relax a little bit and get ready for the afternoon session. Um, our first order of business today is going to be a presentation from Paul Doremus, the acting AA. He's going to be talking with us about it's a listening session on President Biden's executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. And Paul, thank you very much for being here. It's been a while since we've chatted, but I'm glad you're here, and we're looking forward to the presentation. And hopefully, the council will provide some feedback for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we really
Yeah.
appreciate.
So whenever you're ready to start, as long as I see your presentation just came up on my screen, so it's all you. Go ahead, Paul. I appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Mr. Chairman, and really do appreciate the time that you have made available for us today. And it's really great to connect with you all. And sorry it's remotely, but we've become somewhat accustomed to that, I'm afraid. But we'll look forward to the opportunity to meet with you all in person in the future. And we're short on presentation here. The next slide really tells you what this is all about. We're here to hear from you about the direction that we received from President Biden in Executive Order 14008 that asks us to start efforts, which we did from 60 days from the order. And the key thing is getting input from fishermen, regional ocean councils, fishery management councils, scientists, other stakeholders on how to make fisheries, and this is in bold, that's really the topic of our conversation, how to make fisheries and protected resources more resilient to climate change. This includes changes in management, conservation measures, science improvements, monitoring, cooperative research. It is a very broad request, and this is part of the president's a very large focus and very clear support for addressing climate change and minimizing the effects of climate change across all sectors within the United States. And here we have a big focus on the resources that we are all entrusted with managing. Research has certainly shown, and I'm sure all of you in your line of work have seen the extent to which fisheries, protected resources, their associated habitats and ecosystems are being affected by climate change. And we are seeing all manner of trends in ocean ecosystems, including warming oceans, increasing acidification, sea level rise, and of particular concern in a number of the councils is the distribution and changes in the distribution and abundance of marine species, and the consequent impact that has on the people and the communities that depend on those resources. At NOAA broadly, we, as you know, work with partners to understand and respond to changing climate and ocean conditions generally, help minimize impacts, develop ways to adapt to the changes that we're seeing and are underway, and ensure that future generations can enjoy the benefits of healthy marine ecosystems. That's our bottom line. That's our core business, if you will. And climate is a driver, and we need to figure out how best to respond. So the councils are absolutely central to this, are integral to our fisheries management structure, as you well know. And we have, through the opportunity to connect with you, an opportunity to connect across the fishing industry, across states, tribes, non-governmental organizations, and really focus on our core need to ensure that federal regulations are appropriate for the species that we're managing, the industry needs, and the public. So your expertise, and we're talking and having the same session with all councils, because your expertise is absolutely paramount in determining how we can deal with this issue of climate and ensure that we are doing everything we can to sustain resilient fisheries and protected resources. So I'd like to really not do much by way of presentation. There's this slide that gives you our charge, broad as it is. And yeah, you could go ahead and flip to the next one. Thank you. We have been putting out, we did put out a broad request for comments. And the key thing here that I wanted to direct you to is the site, oceanresources.climate at noaa.gov, and the consequent website that's listed there too, where we're posting information about this whole effort. And that's a good place to go now and check in the future if you want to see status of our efforts, and to if this is the site that we had available for public comment until just a couple of days ago. And we're really looking forward to the opportunity just to have an open discussion here today, to get your thoughts top of mind regarding fisheries and protected resources and how to make them more resilient to climate change. And this is really related to our core authorities that this EO is directed towards. So that includes not only Magnuson-Stevens Act, but also Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, Sanctuaries Act, Coastal Zone Management Act, others. And this, as I characterized earlier, it asks us, the executive order, to collect recommendations on how to make fisheries, including aquaculture and protected resources, more resilient to climate change. So that can include changes in management conservation measures, improvements in science, monitoring, cooperative research. And we will, as we gather information around the country, we'll be using this input to inform our engagements with the administration and next steps. And that will include the next series of regional action plans under our own NOAA Fisheries Climate Science Strategy. And that is a part of the way ahead. But right now, we're at the front end of this whole process. And this is, in our thinking, going to be a long-term process. This is not the one and only chance for input, but it's important time for input as we size up the nature of this challenge and figure out how to respond to climate change over the long haul. So this will be an ongoing engagement with you and with others in our, broadly speaking, in our fisheries world. But we have a particular focus on council views, and really look forward to what you have to say today, your thoughts, your ideas. We are dominantly in listening mode. I will be on this call along with our staff, who are on the call as well, to make sure we get a good recording and reading of your views. So, Mr. Chair, I would really just like to open this up for you all. I can't, we're not connected visually, so I don't have a way to select folks. However, it works best for you to manage the conversation. I can turn the mic back to you and appreciate everybody's input.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Paul. The way that we've been handling it is that I'm able to see the participants list. I think we'll probably get some comments from members of the council, and then we will have an opportunity to go out to the public. A question for you, based on the timing of this, is the CCC going to have an opportunity to weigh in? Is this going to be something that falls within that timeline under the executive order?
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know when our next meeting's scheduled, but I was just wondering, how that could work.
We did agree in our last discussion with the CCC to provide an opportunity to, in effect, get the collective view.
Okay.
And I don't know the actual timing of that offhand right now, but we did.
Okay. Yeah, that's
we
fine.
did, and we did, we planned for that, and we'll look forward to that opportunity as well. So we get
good.
both the regional and the collective perspective, and I think that conversation will be very helpful as well.
Yeah, perfect. That sounds good. Yeah, and I don't have I can't remember the details off the top of my head with everything else that's going on in the world today.
Indeed.
But yeah, but thanks for your presentation. Let me see. I'm going to ask if anyone from the council has anything that they want to provide as far as comment or questions for Paul. Okay, I've got two hands. Let me start with Tony Delernia. Go ahead, Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Assistant Administrator, for the opportunity to provide some comments. My comments are going to be directed towards the language in the executive order regarding management measures. Uh, it's no secret that we're seeing species shifts, whether you want to call it species shift or regime shift on the East Coast, but it's clear that that's occurring. And there's been some cry out to add states to a council, perhaps subtract some states to a council to address these species shifts. Now, I'm not in favor of adding or subtracting states from a particular council. I would recommend that the council compositions remain the same for the three East Coast councils. But for the purposes of management, I would suggest that the language in Section 301 of the Magnuson Act be amended. And I don't have the exact language. I'll leave that up to the attorneys in the group here. But I would suggest that for the purposes of final actions on many species, that a state petition the Secretary of Commerce to have voting privileges on final actions on a particular species, be it summer flounder, scuppel, black sea bass in the southern New England states, or perhaps scallops in the cases of, say, Virginia or North New Jersey. And I suggest that some type of criteria be established using both landings data and survey data to determine. That's something the Secretary would use, that information would use to determine whether or not a petition on a state be granted, and that voting privilege be awarded to a state for a period of 5 to 10 years and be reviewed in every 5 or 10 years, whatever the agency decides. And what I would suggest is that just like the liaison can go to a council and participate, say if I was going to the South Atlantic Council, I could participate in discussions of the South Atlantic Council as the Mid-Atlantic's liaison, but I do not have voting rights on the final action. So I would suggest that the language in the act be amended so that a state, if a governor petitions the Secretary of Commerce to have their state included in final actions on a particular species, then the criteria that is established be used to evaluate whether or not to grant that state voting privileges. So that, say, in the case of summer flounder, if the states of Massachusetts or Rhode Island asked that they wanted to be included on final decisions, that they have equal voting representation at the council table, the Mid-Atlantic table, to make those final decisions. Again, in 1977, when we divided up all the critters, so to speak, amongst the councils, it was based on the distribution of those species. Well, that distribution has changed. And so rather than adding states to each council, I would suggest that a state just be giving voting privileges on a particular species, and it be determined on a species by species basis. After a state's governor petitions the secretary, and the secretary uses the criteria established by the agency or the center or the councils. And if they decide that, yes, that state does have a significant interest in the fishery, then that state have voting privileges. Perhaps what you could do is say the representatives from Connecticut would currently on the New England Council would travel to the Mid-Atlantic Council to vote on summer flounder, and I'll extend that to the other species. So I'm trying to be brief. I've sent the white paper into the agency already, making this recommendation, and that's my comments. I'll be happy to answer any questions folks may have. And again, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and to Mr. Luisi, thank you for the opportunity to present my views. I'll mute myself.
All right, Tony, I appreciate that. I don't know if Paul, if you have any kind of response, or if there's any questions to Tony from other members of the council, but I'll turn to Paul to see if you have anything you want to discuss with Tony.
Well, thank you. I just want to say thank you for the input. And again, we don't have the luxury of time to respond directly to all of these questions, but Tony did mention that he sent in some views, and I just wanted to add, we certainly welcome folks to send in addition to their comments, any additional materials that are relevant to this topic. So thank you, Tony, for doing both of those. Really very valuable input, and appreciate your perspective and your recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. If I could ask staff to go back one slide, I think it might be helpful to have the slide where the charge, yeah, that's the one there. So, this is the charge that Paul talked about. And so we're looking for feedback um, as to how to make fisheries and protected resources more resilient to climate change. And I think it'd be more helpful to have this up um, while we have that discussion. I have a few hands right now. I'm going to go next to Dr. Duvall. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Dramus, for the opportunity to provide input. My comment is really more about the science to support the types of management approaches that Mr. Delarnia was referencing in his comments. And, I'm sure that you all are looking across the entire, NOAA Fisheries Science Enterprise to see where, what modifications you all can make, excuse me, to speak to this executive order. And I guess I just wanted to make the comment that I would hope that there would be support for the science centers in their efforts to try to improve or enhance, existing surveys that are going to provide us with the management information to, I think, detect changes that are happening in the ocean environment, particularly here on the East Coast with respect to climate change. There was I think a previous effort that, the pandemic put on pause that I think the Southeast Fisheries Science Center was the lead on. And I see Dr. Hare is on the line, and I'm sure he knows more about where that effort stands right now. But, it was a cooperative effort between the science centers to, look at their survey programs and, how to enhance or improve or collaborate more to try to ensure that we have the appropriate information to be able to detect changes and species movements so that we can, better prepare ourselves from a governance perspective in managing them. And so I would just urge support for those efforts. And, also, I don't know if there is a way or if y'all might consider, some central portal or platform, by which fishermen might be able to submit some of their on the water observations. Often they're the ones who are seeing these changes, before our science can catch up. And from a broad perspective, I think it's going to be very important to try to find, ways to integrate that, sometimes often qualitative information with the very quantitative information that we're often using to make management decisions. So that was all I had to say. I wish you luck on this effort. I hope there's a lot of participation. And I guess maybe just one question, if there's going to be any compilation of responses from the regions or, of the suggestions that are received. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Michelle.
Michelle. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
And if I could just quickly address the question. So there's a couple of avenues. One is the CCC conversation that was already mentioned as one avenue for sort of a cross-cutting view. We are looking right now at how best to make information that we're collecting publicly available. The council discussions are a public record, so those records will be available, and we're looking at how to best compile and make available the other information we're gathering as well. So certainly the spirit of all of this is broad input and transparency, and we'll provide more information about how to get access to other results of our conversations around the country coming up soon. Again, the website I mentioned earlier is a good place to look for updates on the process as we move through it. And thank you again for your input.
Yeah, thanks for that. I might turn now to John Hare. I saw you on the list of participants. Do you have anything you want to add, given Michelle's comments regarding the Science Center?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you very much for the question, Michelle. Vince Saba, who's going to be giving a presentation tomorrow to the council about sort of where the Northeast Fisheries Science Center is with regards to our climate change research. He's the Northeast Fisheries Science Center lead for that Southeast Northeast workshop. And so I'll just send him an email today, but he would be the best person to answer your question. I know that they've been working to reschedule that, but I don't know the exact dates. But so it's Vince Saba at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center and Todd Kellison at the Southeast Fisheries Science Center. But I'll try to get you that information.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I think he's on tap for first thing tomorrow morning. So yeah, that'd be good. And maybe he can address Michelle's questions. Okay, so let me see here. Give me a second. We have a few other hands up, and I will go to the public, but I'm going to stay with the council at this point. Kate Wilkie, I see your hand, and you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation from Mr. Doremus. So I just have a fairly short comment. In fisheries management, we tend to look backward to determine when we're taking action at the councils, and I think we need to adapt the culture and approach to be more forward-looking, as well as considering the historical perspectives of our fisheries. But we need to move away from the assumption of a steady state of the ocean and fish populations as we recognize the climate change impacts on the ocean. And this is particularly important for our data collection and stock assessments, which rely on steady state assumptions. Also, our assessments, our essential fish habitat and HAPC should be reviewed with climate-related shifts in mind and start thinking about habitat as more dynamic versus static. The Mid-Atlantic Council has started to do some of this, but these comments are applicable to, nationwide, our other regions as well. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Kate. Appreciate that comment. Let's see here. Peter Defer, I have you up next. Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Doremus, for your comments and for being here. I have just a couple of comments, and one of them has to do with the fisheries being those who prosecute a fishery as well as the stock, and then our protected resources. So in looking at resiliency, there's not much that we can do to change the innate properties of a stock. But what we can do is reduce any excess additional threat to them, any additional stress. We can also apply that, I think, to the fishery themselves, so that if we give the fishery an opportunity to follow an alternative pathway or another means for continuing on in their fishery, maybe it's not doing exactly the same thing that they've done for the last few decades, but then they will have the opportunity to come out on the other side, which is what resiliency really is supposed to mean in an ecological sense. The other thing that I think we're going to need, and I want to pick up on things that both Kate and Michelle said, and I know John may have thought about this already, is that we're going to need more resources in the science center, not just ours, but the others, because they're going to have to collect some new data. At a biological level, the members of the stock that go off into the new habitat or who are trailing in the old habitat are the ones that are going to have new characteristics. And so we're going to have to find a way to identify those characteristics so that we can understand them. It's not going to be the middle of the road. It's not going to be the average members, the bulk of the stock. It's going to be the founders, the margins that will have those characteristics that will be leading the species off into a more sustainable habitat and lifestyle. So I think that's true. Not of the protecting species from additional stresses also means that we have to somehow find a way to get around the internal conflicts that we're creating in some of our efforts. And I'm thinking about the conflicts between maintaining, sustaining what we've got, as well as developing some new things. Having aquaculture in the same place that we're trying to protect right whales means that we're going to have to do the aquaculture in a way that it doesn't add an additional risk to the right whales. And that's just an example. So that's a challenge that we all have, that I would just make as an observation. And I do hope that we can get some more resources into getting new scientific information, because we are going to have new data that we have not yet been collecting, maybe molecular data. Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I don't know if Paul, if you had any response, or I can go to the next commenter.
Well, again, just appreciate the input, and we can go to the next comment.
Okay.
But we're certainly aware a number of folks have commented on the science side of this, and really do appreciate those comments about the data requirements and the challenges of getting the best available scientific understanding of these phenomena into management considerations. So I just want to generally note across several of these comments that we certainly appreciate that perspective.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Paul. Kate Wilkie, you still have your hand up. Did you have something that you wanted to? Okay, it just went down. Let's go next to Dewey Hemmelwright. Go ahead, Dewey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Doremus, for allowing us to give comments. In reading this executive order, it makes no mention of highly migratory species, which is not managed under the councils. And how does that work, or how does that fit in here? So it would be, at home and abroad, and U.S. fisheries take a whipping abroad. And I just wonder how do we address comments, given that this EO does not play out for HMS fisheries? Thank you.
Paul?
We are here to hear those kinds of concerns. And while the EO may not specifically call out highly migratory species, that certainly is within scope. And really what's within is what all of you think we should be. So I don't know if you have any further comment on observations you have or any recommendations, but certainly want to gather here and through any written materials or other provide concerns you have to highly migratory species, whether they relate to management actions here or international related considerations. So we welcome that comment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be providing some at a later date. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dewey. Appreciate those thoughts. Eric Reed, you're next. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Doremus. I just have two quick comments. One is with regards to 216A, which I see is not on the screen, but I'm going to comment anyway. In the Mid-Atlantic in New England, the ocean is already under a variety of management protections. And I actually have a question on how is that calculation of the 30 by 30 play into 216A, given the vast amount of ocean that's already under substantial management protections by both councils and the ASMFC. And with regards to 216C, to make fisheries more resilient to climate change and to understand actual change, the input of the councils and the industry really needs to be considered something more than advisory, in particular with the advent of offshore wind. Mr. Doremus, we need some teeth, and we don't have them. So maybe you can give us a nice set of dentures and we could have at it. funding needs to be appropriated at a meaningful level, especially financial level, to allow the Northeast Fisheries Science Center and the advancement of cooperative research to maintain and provide best science available, starting at baseline studies and cumulative effects on climate change over the long term. So that's my input. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Appreciate those comments. Let me bring up my list and see who else we have.
Mr. Chair,
from
this
the
is Paul.
council.
I'd be happy
Yeah,
to
Paul.
speak to. There was one question in the first part of
Yeah, I
the
was
last
trying. Yeah,
response.
please go ahead.
If you don't
That's
mind,
fine.
thank you.
Yep.
No, I
yep.
did want to confirm. Thank you for the comment around 216C and the advisory, more than advisory role. Appreciate that. We hear you there. But on the 216A, that is a separate process. This is everybody's more or less calling that the 30 by 30 provision, and that is under, by the president's direction, that is under the Department of Interior. So any information that we gather through this process, and clearly there's areas of overlap, and any information we gather through this process, we are making available, and we certainly encourage councils and others, as many already have, to engage with the Department of Interior directly. We'll be conveying those views ourselves as well, and we'll be involved in an interagency process as the kind of separate considerations of 216A move forward. So I just want to explain the relationship between those two things and welcome your input. We're really focused on to the 216C part here today, but always welcome views on that are top of mind to you, and we'll make sure they get to the right place.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks, Eric. I'm going to go next to Paul Reese. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, loud and clear.
Great, thanks. So my internet, every half hour or so, I lose 30 or 40 seconds. And it happened during Peter Defer's comment. And I apologize if I'm reiterating something he said specifically, but you know, the conversations we had yesterday and in the past, and everybody's unhappiness with MRIP, would it be foolish to try to include some specific language to dump significant funding into improving and stabilizing MRIP? I think that would go a long way for a lot of the things that we're trying to do here and in this executive order.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Paul. I'll turn to the other Paul. Do you have anything? I mean, do you have any thoughts, or have you heard that from maybe other listening sessions that you've had?
We've had a lot of listening sessions. I've participated in many, and for all of our council engagements, either Sam or I are engaged directly in those. I have not personally heard the MRIP comment, but I can certainly understand it and appreciate the view at this point. So, I'd love to hear the connection between, in your mind, between this broad topic of climate resilience and MRIP to draw that connection, but certainly welcome recommendations as you see fit related to this topic.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Paul. And thanks to both Pauls. I see another council hand. I'm going to go, Paul, if you can put your hand down, I'm going to go next to Joe Semino. Joe, you're up.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and appreciate the time to make these comments as both a council and commission member for New Jersey. We were providing written comments, and I had one in there that I kind of wanted to have a chance to say on the record, since I don't know how clear I made it in my written comments. You know, I have great concern for working waterfronts for our fisheries. We're very fortunate in New Jersey. We have a lot of access on the Jersey Shore for recreational fishermen, and there are some, you know, deep-seated famous commercial ports. But climate change could impact all of those areas, and the loss of traditional working waterfronts and recreational access spots concerns me greatly. And I've struggled, where can the federal government help in this? And I have thought that perhaps NOAA can work on policy guidance for other federal agencies that are providing aid, that aid goes to places that take priority to ensuring that water dependent businesses are included in the planning or replanning for rebuilding. A lot of work has been put out for how working waterfront should work, and I thought, between that and perhaps even hosting some regional outreach for municipalities on how they should be planning is another thought I had, and I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. Is there anyone else on the council that would like to make comment? Peter Hughes, go ahead. I just saw your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your being here today and sharing with us this information. My question has to do with another commenter earlier, and that's wind energy. And when President Trump was in office, there was a doctrine called the one federal decision policy that dictated or governed that if BOEM or in this case DOI was putting something forward, they were the only ones that were really allowed to move the policies forward without any interruption from other agencies. And I'm wondering, since that policy was revoked in January, does the National Marine Fisheries Service and NOAA will they be taking a larger role in wind energy? We have a bit of a crisis on where DOI has leased these areas. And, unfortunately, they've leased them in highly productive and highly historical commercial fishing areas that, frankly, support a thriving industry who provides a relatively inexpensive source of protein to the American public. So I'm just wondering if NOAA's role has changed somewhat with the revocation of the one federal decision policy that was signed in January. Thank you.
Paul, any thoughts?
Thank you for the comment, and that's a broader discussion, but generally we do have a significant role and have been very heavily engaged through the consultation requirements, various consultation requirements, as well as around science. So this is a Department of Interior permitting process. The fundamental authorities have not changed. But this is an area that we're heavily engaged in, and we certainly appreciate, Peter, your thoughts and your concerns, and duly noted for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you to both of you. Pull up my list. Joe, Samina, Joe, if you have some follow-up, your hand's still up. And Peter, your hand's still up as well. Anyone else from the council wants to offer any thoughts on this? I didn't have a chance to talk to Chris, and I hate to put you on the spot, Chris, but is there any, is the council going to make are we going to provide comment on this?
Yeah, I was going to wait. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to wait to say hello to Paul and bring that up and ask him a question. So
okay,
once you go through the other folks, then I'll
yeah, let me go through the let me go out to the audience or to the public. I've got a few hands up from the public. We'll get some questions answered or some comments, and then I'll come back to you, Chris, before we wrap up. I'm going to start with James Fletcher. Go ahead, James.
In this, you have include change in management. James Fletcher with the United National Fishermen's Association. Is it possible that we could consider change in management so that we currently have a permit system that if the species moves into an area and you do not have a permit, it becomes discard? Could that be done where we change to a dollar value to the boat and most or everything that is caught is landed if there's a market for it? Is it possible under this order to change the way we manage? On the commercial side, if you catch it and there's a market for it, you sell it. On the recreational side, if you catch it, regardless of the size, you keep it. Is that a possibility under this order, or is this just another horse and pony show? Thank you for your time. James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association.
All right, thanks for your comment, James. I don't know if Paul wants to respond.
I could just quickly say thank you, James, as well. And we're at the process stage of the process now where we're understanding and hearing from people what sort of management responses they think would be effective. So you point taken. I appreciate your view on this. This is the beginning of the process, not the end, and we take all views very seriously. And we're looking at within Magnuson and within our other statutory responsibilities, how could we respond most effectively? So definitely, management actions are not just relevant; they're actually what we really want to hear people's thoughts on. So thank you for your recommendation.
All right, thank you both. Going to go next to Bonnie Brady. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Mr. Doremus, my name is Bonnie Brady. I represent the Long Island Commercial Fishing Association, and I will be submitting comments later. However, regarding how to make fisheries more resilient to climate change, I know there's been discussion in the past through Commerce regarding a larger push for aquaculture. However, I would suggest or possibly implore that aquaculture, where it is cited, especially in things like our EEZ, should not be of the kind that competes with our own sustainable wild harvest fisheries. As a result, we have, I know, one project that, if given their desires, will directly affect wild capture fisheries throughout New York and basically bottom our market. So if there was a type of look at those that do not compete with other wild capture fisheries in the regional areas, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. Appreciate your comment. Greg DiDomenico, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Just a quick question to Mr. Doremus through you, Mike. Is that okay?
Of course. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Paul. I had a question about one particular section of the executive order entitled Scientific Integrity Presidential Memorandum. Is that will the CCC provide specific guidance on how to meet these standards? Thank you.
Paul?
Thank you, Greg. And this, I think, broadly construed, the executive order related to scientific integrity is an effort by the administration to signal its strong commitment to broad scientific integrity principles. We have a science integrity policy at NOAA. It has been heavily reviewed externally and very positively so. So we don't necessarily see any change in practice from what we already have in place. From our vantage point, the scientific integrity direction from the Biden administration is quite in keeping with our core principles and the management practices that we have set up. So we always welcome comments from CCC or anywhere else on issues of concern related to scientific integrity, but we have developed formal and pretty sound practices around scientific integrity. And again, we welcome input on any aspect of our operations, but we view that as a very strong endorsement and reinforcement of the principle of scientific integrity. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Paul. And I may be asking the wrong person, but do you think the other departments, Department of Interior, BOEM, National Fish and Wildlife Service, et cetera, do they have their own scientific integrity memorandums, or will they be adhering to this one?
The direction is to all cabinet agencies, and if they don't, and I do not know the status of all those other agencies, but if they don't, I'm sure they will be required to develop them.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks for your question, Greg. And come on, Paul, you telling me you don't know what all the other agencies are doing at this point?
I'm gonna go find out.
Yeah, right. Because that's
It's
what
a good question.
you're expected to do, given your new role. It's I'm sure it's a daunting task. Let's see. Let me pull up my list here and see who we have left. We have one other member from the audience, Katie Almeida. Go ahead, Katie.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Great. Katie Almeida from the Town Dock. I have sent in some written comments already, but I'll just touch upon a few of the points that I made. My first point is to the issue of seats on a council. I'm sure many of you are aware that I'm one of the public members that have been pushing for Rhode Island to have a seat and full participation on the Mid-Atlantic Council. I still believe that. I'm sure some other states would be interested as well. I'm not interested in taking any seats off a council, so I haven't even heard that as an option. But I think that discussion should still be on the table. There are states that are not represented on certain councils, and that goes for both Mid-Atlantic and New England. I'm not familiar with the South Atlantic, that have a large financial stake in species that are managed on another council. And it's not simply about being able to attend the final council for the final vote. It's about being able to participate on different subcommittees like the FMAT and the SSC, for example. I realize we all have a chance to get on each other's advisory panels, and we do. This is about having full participation on the councils. And I think, a solution to this should the states, everyone involved should be able to have a discussion with each other and not just have a single council decide that, they don't want to open seats to other councils. I realize this is a very political and sensitive subject, and, I just think it should have its day for a discussion. My next point is, I think we need to focus on diversity and fishery access and the need for flexible management. You all also know my opinion on limited access programs. Limited access programs do not support diversity and access or flexibility. The flexibility that we need as we see changes in our ecosystem that affect our stocks. Particularly a concern about limited access fisheries being further limited access. Like we just took on ELEX. So we just took a further reduction on an already closed fishery. And I think those need a second look as a way to manage fisheries. And lastly, I wanted to touch upon the Science Center and cooperative research. We need a well-funded Science Center and cooperative research branch to track these changes that we're seeing. We also need to be able to track the changes that might occur with the wind energy development that we're seeing up and down the coast. The Science Center and the cooperative research branch being well-funded will allow them to carry out the research and monitoring needed for both of those issues. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your comments, Katie. I don't see any other hands at this time. Let me bring it back to the council. Chris, did you want to make a statement?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Paul. Thanks for being here. Certainly appreciate the opportunity. You've heard a lot of good comments today, and I think that what we should plan to do as a council is put together a letter that we'd send to the agency. I think, Mr. Chairman, we could talk about this letter more tomorrow during my executive director's report, but it's something that the staff think would probably be appropriate, even given the comments that we've heard today. We've heard some additional things like Dewey talked about HMS, and we could incorporate those in the letter as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think it's a letter would be a good idea, but again, we could deal with that tomorrow.
Okay.
Just from a broad perspective, Paul, anything that I think you probably have heard this and you heard it today, anything that NIMS could do to enhance the data and the analyses that we need to address the changes that we're seeing related to climate change would be a good thing. So that's obvious. But one of the questions that I have for you relates to a comment that you made about the output, the endpoint. And I'm just curious, I know it's early and we're just starting the process, but what's the agency thinking? We're thinking about, or you're thinking about action plans? Is it where this is going to go, or is it strategic plans, or what are you guys thinking?
Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris, great to hear from you, and thank you for your efforts to work with the chair and council staff on pulling together a letter summarizing your perspectives and views and benefiting from this input as well. So really do appreciate that, as well as your comment around the data monitoring and analytical requirements associated with climate change. It's been a big theme in the conversation here today, and certainly well noted. We don't yet have a real line of sight to the final product, if you will. We're in the initial stage here. We look forward. This was the early direction from the administration, and we are working with the administration and will with other federal agencies and different components of this and other executive orders to map out the way ahead and how we intend to respond. There will be a response. I don't have yet the schedule or exactly the nature of it, but the whole goal here is to inform actions that can be taken. And it'll be directed towards those ends in some fashion or another. So we'll look forward to getting back to you, Chris, with more detail. But we're pretty much in the front end of this and very early in the administration, and we'll be working as we kind of take in full measure the input that we're getting through these types of discussions and start to map things out and work with the administration on the implications of this. We'll certainly be swinging back and engaging with the councils on that process.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Paul, for that. And just one follow-up, just in terms of letters and comments. What would be more helpful to you in a letter? Very specific sort of recommendations, or these broader overall sort of themes like we touched on today?
The themes are very helpful. They help. This is a big question, and the themes help us sort of order the universe, if you will. But we were particularly interested as well in hearing your specific recommendations on actions that you think should be taken, and the connectivity to management choice and management concerns and management issues is very important. And I hate to say both because that makes your job a little bit bigger, but both would really be most helpful, Chris. And thank you again for your effort to summarize, in a sense, the broad themes. That's very, again, it helps us sort of organize the topic set, but also specific recommendations from a council perspective that you think we should be entertaining would be extremely helpful.
Great. Thank you.
Anything else, Chris?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thanks for those questions, and we'll work together. And maybe we can even talk about it a little bit more tomorrow during your report, the executive director's report. So let me look and see at my list here. Katie, you still have your hand up, but I assume that you've covered what you want to cover. Does anyone else from the council have anything they want to add? before we move on? Okay, seeing no additional hands, Paul, I want to thank you very much for taking the time out of what I expect is a very busy day every day for you. It's good to hear your voice. It's been a while, and I look forward to working with you, with the CCC, and through these actions to provide you with the necessary information to help the agency move forward with this order. So thank you again for your presentation, and I look forward to talking with you soon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We really appreciate the opportunity here today. You all making time in your difficult agenda and as well, and we'll really benefit from all the comments. Thanks to all of those who did weigh in today, and we certainly welcome written input as well. And Mr. Chair, look forward to hearing further discussion in CCC around this and your kind of summary input from the council level. So thank you all again. This is, as I mentioned earlier, part of a long-term process. It's a big question, and there are no easy answers or quick solutions, and it's something that we need to make sure we're focused on the right areas and the areas of greatest urgency from the vantage point of our partners, councils, commissions, and our broad stakeholder community. And this conversation today has been enormously helpful to us, and thank you for the time.
Yeah, thanks so much. Okay. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. It's 1:58, 1:57. Let's take about 5 to 6. Let's come back at 2:05. I want to check to see, is Sarah, are you on the call right now?
I am on the call right now. Can you hear me okay?
You're okay. Yeah, I checked earlier and I didn't see your name, but I see it now. Okay, so let's give everybody like 5 to 7 minutes, take a little break, and then we'll come back for your presentation. Looking forward to it. Okay, welcome back, everyone. It is 2:05, so I'd like to get started with our next item on the agenda. We're going to get a report from Dr. Sarah Gates with the Northeast Fisheries Science Center on the 2021 Mid-Atlantic State of the Ecosystem Report and a EAFM risk assessment. So I know Brandon's part of this as well. So there'll be, Sarah, I guess you're gonna do the report, and then we'll have others that can help with questions and answers if necessary. So thanks for being here today with us, and I'm going to turn it over to you, and looking forward to your report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the members of the council. And I remember last year when we gave this report, I think it was your first online meeting, and here we are again with an online meeting. And I really hope next year we're in person again, because I'd like to see you guys. So we'll make the best of it. But thank you very much for your time today. And I will be trying to combine the report on the state of the ecosystem and the risk assessment as much as possible to give you more time for discussion. And so I want to lead off by thanking some people. Kim Bastille is the person at the center who has been gathering all of the data, arranging all the meetings, keeping track of everyone who's contributing, also putting all the data together in a reproducible format, distributing it, making all the figures. So big kudos to Kim. She's holding the whole thing together. And we have section leads on this report, Garrett Piper, Kimberly Hyde, Scott Large, and Sean Lucy, who have all been leading different subgroups on this. We have a list of at least 50 people who've contributed to this report at the end of this. So I really want to thank all of the contributors. And also a big thanks to Brandon and the Mid-Atlantic Council staff who have been updating the risk assessment, in particular the management categories. So let's see if we can, yes, we can advance slides. That's a good sign. So I think you already know this, but for anyone who's new on the council, the State of the Ecosystem Report is basically meant to improve the information and synthesis of ecosystem data for fishery managers. So the idea here is we're trying to link the ecosystem indicators to management objectives, and I'll talk a lot more about that in the coming slides. This is meant to be contextual information right now. This report's been evolving since about 2016 with the input of the council and the SSC and others and lots of partners. And it's intended to be a fishery relevant subset of something that might be considered a full ecosystem status report. So there's an open science emphasis that Kim Bastille is leading, and there's some papers on that if you're interested. And this is used within the Mid-Atlantic Council's EAFM process, as we'll show you. In particular, it feeds directly into your risk assessment. And so what we're showing over here on the right-hand side of the slide is what we call the IEA, or Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Loop. And the council is using, excuse me, a method that's really patterned on this in terms of having defined goals and targets for fishery management, developing indicators that are associated with the goals and targets, assessing the ecosystem, and analyzing uncertainty and risk, and evaluating strategies. And then you can loop through by implementing actions, monitoring those indicators, reevaluating, assessing outcomes, determining whether your objectives are appropriate, developing new indicators, etc. So it's intended to be an interactive process to bring you the ecosystem information that most helps you in your management decision making. We've updated the structure a bit this year, and I just wanted to orient you to that. So in the 2020 report, we had a summary 2-pager, then we had a section on human dimensions indicators, a section on protected species indicators, a section on fish and invertebrate indicators, which included both managed and unmanaged species, and then a section on habitat quality and ecosystem productivity. Based on feedback from both councils, we've changed the structure a little bit this year. All of those indicators that we had before are basically still included in the report, but we've tried to improve the focus on your management objectives and also the synthesis with respect to some important issues that were raised by the councils last year. So in this year's report, you will notice we now have a 3-page graphical summary. The first page is sort of a report card format, and I'll show you that in a moment, but you probably have the report as well. And that's where we take these objectives that are on the right-hand side in this table here, and we say how the indicators say we are doing with respect to these objectives and what some of the implications are. Then page 2 is some summary bullets of risks that are faced that can affect your ability to meet your management objectives. And on page 3 are what we're calling synthesis themes. And this is to orient you to why looking at the ecosystem level and looking across multiple indicators is important, in addition to what we already do very well, which is looking at individual stocks and individual issues. And so then the rest of the report is really just expanding on what's on pages 1 and 2. So there's a section on performance relative to management objectives and a section on risks to meeting those management objectives. And so the table here shows you what those objectives are. And these come from the Magnuson-Stevens Act and other legislative authorities. This isn't something that anyone made up. This is also really linked to the council's own objectives that have been defined through the risk assessment. And I'll show you that throughout the presentation here. But you have objectives related to provisioning and cultural ecosystem services. So that's seafood production, profits, recreation, stability, social and cultural objectives, and protected species objectives. And then there's supporting and regulating ecosystem service that have to do with biomass and productivity. These are things we look at the stock level all the time. And at the ecosystem level, we can look at those in aggregate. And then as well as ecosystem attributes like trophic structure and habitat. And so what we've tried to do is integrate all of this information to make it a little bit easier to see how this may link to your management objectives. I want to point you to the other document that you have is what we're calling the request tracking memo. And we did start this last year. We're just trying to keep track of all of the requests that come in from the councils and how we've been able to respond to them. And that's in order to give you a chance to comment on that and say, okay, yes, that's what we meant, or maybe no, that isn't what we meant, and we would like to actually see this other thing. And so we really want to keep this report on track to meeting your needs as much as possible. And so I won't be going through this tracking memo in this presentation, but it is there, and I'm happy to take any questions about it. And of course, we're happy to receive feedback on this separately if you have any ideas or on any of the topics that are in the memo. Some of these are things that are new indicators that we could introduce in the future, but they just needed a little more work or we needed some feedback. So please, if anyone has any comments on that, we would welcome them. So here's your summary pages, and you're not meant to be able to read them on this slide, but what this is showing you is the first page there with our table. This is our sort of report card style table of performance relative to fishery management objectives. And across the top of each of these is one of the objectives. So for instance, seafood production is here, and then we have little symbols for the trend and the current status. So the trend is the long-term time series of the indicator, and the current status is whether it's above or below the long-term average. And then the implications are listed here that have to do with the summary section that is written up in the larger report. And so what we're hoping is this gives you a snapshot of everything that's in the report in one brief format. And so we would also greatly appreciate feedback on whether this works for you or not, because this is the first year that we've tried something like this. So really any feedback at all, from the formatting to the colors to the content, is very helpful, and we would love to have it. Similarly, the second page is a bulleted list of results, and this is more similar to the summary page you had last year. But what we've done is divided these into two major categories of risks to meeting fishery management objectives. One of those is climate and ecosystem productivity risks, and the other is other ocean uses, specifically offshore wind risks. And again, we're not saying in this report that there are no benefits to offshore wind, but because this is a report for the Fishery Management Council, we are focusing on the aspects of offshore wind development that pose a risk to meeting fishery management objectives. There's a statement on this page as well about the COVID-19 pandemic and how that affected both fisheries and data collection in 2020. We don't have all the results on this yet, but we are aware that obviously this is affecting everything we do. And so we've linked one report that's already out on that, and we're going to continue to evaluate these impacts in future reports. So the third page is giving you these synthesis themes, and I'll just briefly summarize these right now. The idea here is to try to think at the system level and think about why we need to look at all of these different things. We do have a lot of things in this report. I realize it can be quite overwhelming at times, but we are trying to organize this into sort of digestible themes that can help you see where this may help with future decision making. So the first theme is multiple system drivers, and that is represented in this figure here on the left-hand side. And I think this is fairly obvious to everyone when you think about it, but there's a lot of different factors, societal, biological, physical, and chemical, that are driving and influencing marine ecosystems. And they go through a variety of different pathways, and they affect different things differently. So just because the ocean is warming, for instance, it doesn't mean it affects all the species equally. I think everyone understands that, but we've tried to really hone in on what might be some of the multiple drivers for some of your indicators in this report. And we'd appreciate any feedback on whether you find that useful and how we can improve that. The second two themes are regime shifts and ecosystem reorganization. So, and they basically arise from the multiple drivers. Changes in these drivers can lead to a regime shift. And a regime shift is, if you think about it, it's not just like the change from year to year, but it's basically a large, abrupt, and persistent change in the structure and function of an ecosystem. So that's represented in this figure over here on the right, where maybe you've got your system in a sort of stable regime over here, of ecosystem state, but then maybe a whole bunch of different things change, and any one of them changing wouldn't really move it out of that state, but all of them changing at once might push it over this critical threshold, where it would then fall into a new stable regime, regime 2 over here. And so the thing about regime 2 is it may not be really easy to reverse and get back to regime 1. And that's the important thing about ecosystem reorganization, is that these interactions can cause you to be in a new state, and then we'll be responding and adapting to that new environment. And so this slide is also meant to show you that, where you have a kind of a different group of species over here, and the water's slightly different color. Maybe it's a little warmer on this side. And it's not saying that regime 2 is necessarily worse than regime 1. It's just different. And if it's different, as managers, we'll want to understand that so that we can understand kind of what the rules are in regime 2 and how we can best manage our species and our activities within that regime. So these are the themes that we're going to try to bring through in future years and be able to warn you. For instance, if we see regime shifts, we want to be able to tell you about those. If we see signs that there's ecosystem reorganization underway, we want to be able to tell you about that. And so that's why these themes are here in this report. And we're just starting on this year, so we would, again, very much appreciate your thoughts on whether this is a useful way to go with the report. So the orientation to the document, these have not changed since last year. We have the same spatial scale for the Mid-Atlantic State of the Ecosystem Report, and you will see this abbreviation SOE throughout the report, throughout the presentation. So that's what that means. We're focusing on the Mid-Atlantic Bight down here, which is outlined in orange, and you can see in blue the survey strata from the Northeast Fishery and Science Center bottom trawl survey that would be included in the Mid-Atlantic Bight. There's a separate report for New England that will be reported next week to the New England Fishery Management Council. That one covers Gulf of Maine and George's Bank. We do have some coast-wide indicators in here, in particular the protected species indicator. So we try to note where things are coast-wide. But most of the things in this report are at the Mid-Atlantic State of the Ecosystem scale here in the Mid-Atlantic Bight. A new thing added this year is a glossary of terms that's listed in your memo. So that's online for people who, if we're using unfamiliar terminology, we've put this online glossary. We still have technical methods documented online, and we still have all the indicator data available online for anyone who would like to see it or use it. The figures are unchanged from last year in that most of them are time series figures. So they'll have year along the bottom here. Many of them go from the late 60s to 2020, but some of them are shorter. We'll have whatever we're measuring over here on the y-axis. There'll be a title that says what it is. So this in particular is a long shelf distance of all the species in the ecosystem measured by the trawl survey. This is the depth. And so this is where they are along the shelf. The whole population, and where they are at depth, the whole population. This is a real indicator. This is not made up data. And what it's showing you is that the orange line means a significant long-term increase. And so that means in aggregate, all the species that we get on the trawl survey are generally moving up northeast along the shelf, so that we are seeing movement even in aggregate of all these species. I know you were talking about species distribution shifts. We clearly see it for individual species, and we see it across all species. For depth, the same thing. They're in general going deeper. The purple line is a significant long-term decrease in the time series. So when you see those lines, it means they're significant. We don't measure significance for less than 30 years in these reports right now. So based on some studies that we did, but this is again something that we'll be looking at in the coming years to figure out if there's a better way to communicate this. The last thing about these figures is you'll see this gray shaded area in the last, that's showing the most recent 10 years. And so you can very quickly see, we hope, what the trend has been doing in the most recent 10 years. And this dotted line here is the long-term average. So you can see a long shelf distance is above the long-term average in the most recent year, and depth is below the long-term average, again, showing that all the species are going deeper. But this is where we're getting our trend and our status symbols for each of these indicators. So this one would have an increasing trend and above average status symbol. So it would have a little plus and an up arrow. This one would have a down arrow and a little minus because it's a long-term decreasing trend and it's below average. So just to orient you to what the figures look like and how we're interpreting those in the report. So again, this revised structure, just to give you a little more detail, the first section on performance relative to management objectives, we try to structure it so that the first thing you see is what the indicator says. Is it up, down, or stable? So like I was just showing. And why do we think it is changing is a sort of more explicit implications section than we have had in past reports. So I think we've talked about this before, but this is where we've really rearranged things to try to talk about, are there multiple drivers of this trend that we're seeing or the stability that we're seeing? And are there anything concerns with regime shifts or ecosystem reorganization, if there's any evidence of that? And that's applied to all of these objectives. So you'll see a section for seafood production, profits, recreational opportunities, stability, social and cultural, and protected species. Then in the second section, we're looking at risks to meeting the fishery management objectives. And again, it's structured similarly. What does the indicator say? Is it up, down, or stable? And there are multiple indicators for a lot of these risks. So it's a little more complicated to explain, but we still have this implications section, which here is saying, why is this important to you as managers? And it's again, trying to integrate these themes of multiple drivers, regime shifts, and ecosystem reorganization. The risk categories here have come from feedback from the councils on the really high level important things that people would like to see emphasized. The first one is climate change. So we were just talking about that in the previous section of the meeting. We'll be talking about it again in the next section. And again, Vince Saba will be talking about it in the morning. Obviously, this is very important to the council. So we've tried to organize these indicators of climate risk into one section and talk about what the implications are for habitat, for productivity, for species interactions, and for community structure. And then the other big one we've already heard about as well is offshore wind development. And so we have a new section that really expands on that. And so The way this connects to your risk assessment in the Mid-Atlantic is we take these ecosystem indicators and we convert them into what the Mid-Atlantic Council has defined as its risk levels. Okay, so here's an example. I'm not going to do this for all of the indicators, I promise, but it's just to give you an idea of how this works. So our state of the ecosystem indicator is revenue. This is the total revenue indicator. And you're seeing it goes from the late 80s up and through 2019. And we look at this at the ecosystem level. So, and revenue is serving as a proxy for profits. So this is the profits objective, right? And so what we see in this indicator is that black is the revenue of all species combined in the Mid-Atlantic Bight, and it's kind of gone up and is now coming back down. And the red line is the revenue of the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council managed species in the Mid-Atlantic region. And that one does have a long-term declining trend. Now, when we did the risk assessment back in 2017, the council went through and came up with ideas about what would indicate different levels of risk. So for this element, low risk would have been no trend and low variability in revenue. Low to moderate would have been an increasing or high variability in revenue. Moderate to high risk would have been a significant long-term revenue decrease. Now, this is indicated in orange because that's what we've got with the Mid-Atlantic managed revenue in that plot right there. And high would have been a significant recent decrease in revenue. So this one was ranked moderate to high risk. And so you'll see in the risk assessment document that you have a whole table of these different colored cells, and this is where they come from. So again, I'm not going to do this for all the indicators. What I'm going to do instead is, as I'm going through the State of the Ecosystem report presentation, when I get to an indicator, I'm going to say what risk element it corresponds to, what the risk ranking is, and whether that has changed or not from your last report. So in this instance, you're going to see risk element ComRev, which is commercial revenue, and it is unchanged because that trend has not changed from the first time we did this a couple of years back. Okay, so I hope this is helpful, and we're going to, that way we go through state of the ecosystem and risk assessment at the same time. So let's jump into the report. First, we have performance relative to management objectives, and the very first management objective is seafood production. For this one, we have a long-term decreasing trend, and we are below the long-term average, and that's whether we look at all species combined, no matter who manages them in the Mid-Atlantic, or just the Mid-Atlantic managed species. Now, this is a long-term trend, and you can see recently maybe there's signs that we're not always going down, but we are still below this long-term average. So for commercial landings, that's where we're below average and long-term trend, and the recreational landings are doing the same thing. This corresponds to your risk elements of commercial food and recreational food, and these are unchanged because, like I said, these trends have not changed from the first time we did the risk assessment. Now, in the State of the Ecosystem report, we tried to do a deeper dive. What would be causing this? There's multiple potential drivers of landings. There's ecosystem and stock production, there's management, there's market conditions, there's environment. And so we tried to go through our different indicators and ask if any of them told us anything about what might be driving this. So the first thing to look at is biomass in the whole system. You might think if all of the biomass is going down in the system, then of course all the landings would probably be going down in the system too. Well, we don't really see this. We're unable to update the Northeast Fishery Science Center trawl survey data this year because those surveys were not conducted in 2020. We do have a NEOMAP survey for 2020 in the fall, so that data is included here. But the overall message here with NEOMAP in red and NEFSC survey in black is that we don't have declining trends in overall biomass for any of the species groups in the ecosystem, which is probably good news. In fact, maybe a couple of them are actually increasing in the spring or the fall, depending on how you look at this. So that's probably not what is driving landings. The next thing we can look at is ecosystem and stock production. And we have pre-existing risk elements for stock production. That's F status or fishing mortality status, and B status or biomass status. And those are mostly unchanged. That's your plot down here. And this is something the council tracks all the time. So only one species is subject to fishing mortality higher than the threshold amount FMSY, and that's mackerel. And we know that based on the assessment from a couple of years ago. And it's also below its biomass threshold. And one more is below the biomass threshold, but not above the F threshold. And then everybody else is pretty much in the right area in terms of whether there's at or above the biomass threshold and at or above the target. And no one else is subject to fishing exceeding the fishing mortality limit. There is one change this year. The butterfish status for biomass has gone down into low to moderate risk because it was above BMSY, is now below BMSY based on the new assessment. However, nothing based on the individual stocks really looks like that would be driving lower landings. And another thing we added this year were ecosystem overfishing indicators. Now, these are sort of new experimental indicators, so we welcome your feedback on these. But calculating them, there's two of them calculated here, and they're from this paper that came out a couple of years ago, and we just used their thresholds. So what this is showing is this is total landings relative to the amount of primary production in the system. That's this Fogarty index. And in all but the sort of mid 70s, this system has been within the green zone, which is considered the optimal range. By this indicator and by the other indicator, which really just looks at the total catch relative to kind of average primary productivity from all over the globe, which is a little less precise. Even then, at present, we're still pretty much in the green zone here. We're not at the tipping point that would be considered ecosystem overfishing, except possibly back here historically. And this white range is a little bit more uncertain as to what it means, because it could actually contain ecosystem MSY. So by these metrics, it doesn't seem like ecosystem or stock production is what's driving decreased landings in this system. The one thing that we do see is that the benthos group here, which includes surf clams and ocean quahogs in the mid-Atlantic, and also, so for the red line, it's surf clams and ocean quahogs, and the black line would include also scallops. Those both have a long-term decline. And so it suggests that probably the seafood production decline is largely driven by this decline in the benthos fisheries, and that it's probably, since it's not biomass and it doesn't seem to be anything having to do with ecosystem overfishing, market dynamics could be affecting the commercial landings of surf clams and ocean quahogs. There's other drivers that are affecting the recreational landings decline. So sharks have been added this year, and they're a little bit lower. And we know this decline here in pelagic sharks is due to management measures being implemented. There's also survey methodology that changed right at the year where it's the lowest landings in 2018. So we still need to look and see if that change to the survey is affecting that number. But even if it is market dynamics driving this, I think the things to monitor would be climate risks, including the warming and ocean acidification and shifting distribution. So those indicators that we already saw. And there are some changes in ecosystem composition and production that we'll get to later, and also fishing engagement. So this was our attempt at sort of a deep dive into the potential drivers of seafood production. And the good news is it doesn't seem to be ecosystem overfishing, but there are still a lot of things to be monitored. So the second one, and these will all go faster after this, I promise. The second objective is commercial profits. And again, this is the commercial revenue risk element, and this is unchanged. So we already walked through this indicator here. The additional indicator here is called the Bennett indicator, which can separate revenue into price and volume indices. And that's really helpful in terms of multiple drivers, because it tells you whether it's the amount or whether it's the price people are getting that's affecting the revenue more. And so what we see here is that in especially recent years, the price decrease has sort of outweighed any volume increases in the total revenue. This black line is the same as these black lines. When you break it up by group again, you see benthos, this orange here, is kind of a dominant driver of the price area, as well as a lot of the landings. So once again, it seems like this is driven by the benthos. And this really brings up the surf clams and ocean quahogs connection to the climate risk element that you have. They're both rated either moderately high or highly vulnerable to ocean warming and acidification. And we'll show you in another indicator later that we can now measure the pH, the acidification in surf clam summer habitat. It's not yet at the pH that affects surf clam growth, according to lab studies, but it's getting closer. So these are the sorts of things to keep an eye on, and that combine a lot of the indicators across the report. The next objective is recreational opportunities. And for this one, the fleet effort is essentially flat across this long-term trend. The risk element is recreational value, and the reason it's ranked highest risk is because of this decline in the last 10 years that was assessed in 2017. So this is a new data set here, and we may want to go back and reassess whether that's actually a long-term decline that we're concerned about. At the moment, it doesn't look like it, but again, we haven't changed your risk element yet. And the recreational diversity was not part of the risk assessment, and this is showing a long-term decline. And this is actually driven, as we reported last year, by a sort of contraction in the party charter section of the recreational fishery. It went from a high of 24% of trips to about 7% at present, and there's a big shift towards shore-based angling. And I'd like to point out this does not include 2020, where we know a lot of things changed in the recreational fishery. So we'll see what happens next year when we get the data back on that. So this does suggest relative stability in the overall number of recreational opportunities, but it could be something changing with the diversity of opportunities, and that could be something of concern to the council. There's also in your memo, the council had asked for a cumulative weather index to look at whether that's driving effort, and that is under construction. So if you want to take a look at that and give us any further thoughts on how we're trying to construct that, we would greatly appreciate it. It just wasn't ready for this year. So the stability objective is next, and your risk elements of fishery resilience 1 and fleet diversity both address this objective. They were both considered to be low risk in the risk assessment and are currently unchanged. We have new information on recreational diversity now. We're using all these diversity indices to say, basically, if we do not see a change in diversity, that suggests stability. There's other ways to measure this, and we could certainly discuss what other indicators the council might want to include. But at present, the commercial fleet count and fleet diversity are basically static. And the permit species revenue species diversity in the commercial fleet is currently flat, but has declined over here in the beginning of the time series. The recreational diversity of catches similarly does not have any long-term trend, but we pointed out last year, and this is still true, it's basically kept flat by the fact that new species are coming in that are managed by the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council and ASMFC, and replacing the diversity used to come from more mix of New England and Mid-Atlantic managed species. So flat diversity does not mean that the species haven't changed. They have. So that's something to consider. We have added some ecological diversity indices here. The council put these aside in 2017 because it considered there wasn't really enough information. So now there's some new information and could consider whether to include it in the future risk assessments. At the moment, we're only seeing one of these diversity indicators changing, and that's zooplankton diversity. The reason diversity is increasing is because a dominant species is decreasing. And so this could be a sign that something is changing in the ecosystem structurally, and it's definitely something to keep an eye on. When we looked at larval fish diversity and adult fish diversity over here in these other indicators, we don't really see any trends there. And so that's probably good news, but again, it doesn't suggest that your species are not sort of replacing each other. Still, it does suggest a stable capacity to respond to the current range of opportunities for fishing for commercial fisheries. We mentioned how the recreational catch diversity is maintained by a different set of species, and we should probably keep an eye on what's going on in the ecosystem here with the changing dominance of zooplankton. The next objective has to do with fishing community status, and the risk element here is social, and it was ranked low to moderate risk based on the community analysis that was available at the time. This is unchanged, but we do have new community level information, and the representation of it is different. So last year we showed a declining trend in engagement, in commercial engagement in many mid-Atlantic communities. And there was a question from the councils, could you please show more the individual community status? So this year, what we're showing is a status plot similar to your fish stock status plot, where we're looking at both the recreational and commercial engagement scores. And we're showing basically the engagement is sort of the numbers of things, how many ports are there, how many licenses are sold, etc. The reliance is that per capita, so it measures it as relative to the size of the community. And the difference between orange and green here is that orange are considered socially vulnerable communities, whereas the green communities are considered less socially vulnerable. And so this is a static snapshot. But I think what we're hoping is to be able to show you a plot like this each year, and you can see how the engagement and reliance and social vulnerability are changing in these communities over time. And so again, if there's vulnerability happening there, the community might have less ability to respond to changes, whether they're management changes or climate changes or other changes in the system. And so, and the indicators may also be able to point out communities that are vulnerable to environmental justice issues. So we welcome feedback on this presentation. The Pacific Council already gets an analysis very similar to this to keep an eye on how the fishing communities are doing there. And so we can continue this and see how it goes over time, but we welcome your feedback on this. And the last couple of objectives are protected species. So one protected species objective is to maintain bycatch below the thresholds. And this relates to your risk assessment, but in the technical interactions management risk element. And at present, we have 14 species fleet combinations that are considered low risk, 6 that are low moderate risk, and 3 that are moderate to high risk for technical interactions, which do include things like being classified under different levels of marine mammal bycatch. What we're seeing here, though, with these indicators is that both harbor porpoise and gray seal bycatch are currently meeting objectives. They're below this red line. So you want your blue line to be below your red line. The red line is the potential biological removal for the species. The only slight concern here is that the 2019 number, which isn't the official number, it's the rolling average is the official number, did go up a little bit in 2019. The gray seal bycatch is mostly more north of the mid-Atlantic, but it's included here for completeness. A lot of the trends in the bycatch are driven by the population for gray seals, which you'll see in a later indicator is increasing, which I don't think is really news to anybody. The downward trend in the harbor porpoise bycatch is possibly due to decrease in harbor porpoise abundance, which reduces their overlap with fisheries, and a decrease in the effort in the fisheries. So again, digging into the multiple drivers here, we are meeting objectives, but knowing why can be helpful, especially with respect to an increase in something like gray seals. The other objective is to recover endangered populations. And again, I think this isn't really news to anyone. The trend continues to go down for the North Atlantic right whale population, which had recovered up until about 10 years ago and is now showing this downward trend. The calf abundance also shows a downward trend over time, although it's possibly getting a little more encouraging. And I think the 2020 number might even be up to the average. We're not sure yet. We won't know that till next year. But just tracking this to keep it on the radar. The drivers for this include combined fishery interactions and ship strikes, distribution shifts of the whales, and the availability of the zooplankton prey, copepods. There are also unusual mortality events continuing for 3 large whale species and for harbor and gray seals. And so the food web to prey is one of your risk elements that addresses this. It doesn't really address right whales per se, because it says whether any mid-Atlantic species are prey of marine mammals. These guys eat mostly copepods, so it doesn't really affect them, but none of these have changed based on anything from the protected species, and almost all of them are low risk interactions, and there's 3 that are low to moderate risk interactions for your species. And the technical interactions we went over on the last slide, but that applies to this one as well. So the last section of the report is the risks to meeting fishery management objectives. And this is where we'll get into climate change. So the climate change, there are a lot of indicators, and it affects multiple elements in your risk assessment. And the indicators you're seeing here are basically drivers, multiple drivers. And so I think your risk assessment elements for climate and distribution shift were based on the 2016 climate vulnerability analysis led by Dr. Hare and many others. And they still apply. They're currently unchanged. And I think what these indicators are showing you in this report is that the projections of the conditions are pretty much on track. It is still getting warmer. We are still seeing increased temperature at both the bottom and surface of the ocean. We're seeing marine heat waves. We're seeing the Gulf Stream change its position to be further north. So there's quite a lot going on in the system, in the physical system, that is confirming that the climate change impacts that were projected are happening. In particular, I want to draw your attention to the marine heat waves, and I think Vince is going to talk a little bit more about this tomorrow, but suffice it to say, we didn't have like one super intense heat wave in the mid-Atlantic last year, but we did have a whole bunch of heat waves. And so even though we didn't have a very big intense heat wave, the cumulative impact of these heat waves is the third highest we've seen. And so then it's not uniformly warm either. The spring was actually a little bit cooler in the mid-Atlantic, but the fall was quite warm, and the winter and the summer were quite warm. And these are all continuing trends in the surface water that all but winter have this increasing trend. And so this affects multiple things in the ecosystem. We're also looking at the estuarine conditions, had a nice contribution from the colleagues in the Chesapeake Bay. And this affects your risk element on estuarine habitat, which is currently ranked low risk for 10 species and high risk for 4 species, the estuarine dependent species. This is unchanged, but we have a lot of new information on estuarine conditions. And so we have the opportunity to refine this if we want to. In the Chesapeake Bay in 2020, saw a similar pattern of a warm winter, a coolish spring, and then warm summer and fall. And you can see that here from the buoy data. This is a different long-term average than we use offshore, but it's still giving you the same idea of these warm conditions. And that did affect multiple species in there. The offshore habitat was a risk element that the council put aside, again, to try to get more information on it. And now we do have more information on it that the council could consider in future risk assessments. One indicator is the cold pool. This is an important feature of the mid-Atlantic offshore habitat that a lot of species rely on, or also acts as a barrier to some species. And you can see from this plot that the cold pool area itself has not really, there's no significant long-term trend, but what you do see is the very warm years, the cold pool area is very small. So this is 2012 outlined here in red. The cold pool was really small compared to the largest extent in the time series back here in 2004, I think. And the most recent year we have in the data is 2018. That's in black here, so that was fairly average. So we can track things like these aspects of habitat. Another new set of data provided by our colleagues at Rutgers is some acidification data that's measured in situ out on the shelf and in some habitat that's important to both Atlantic surf clams and sea scallops. And you can see here the summer habitat right here, these dark blue areas. So the cold pool affects the basically the transfer of the water out there on the shelf, and changes in the cold pool can affect how much the pH changes at the bottom, basically. And so what we're seeing basically is a slight pun, sorry about that. So the pH is getting more acidic in these bottom waters, but it's not quite at that threshold yet that's been measured in the lab. So that's good, but something to keep an eye on for offshore habitat. For ecosystem productivity, your risk element is EcoProd. It's rated low to moderate risk right now and currently unchanged, but we do have a lot of new indices. So the indices that rated this low to moderate were that we're seeing some changes in the ecosystem, but we can't necessarily say that they're a bad thing. What we do see is this increased summer productivity of primary production, but we're showing this year is that this is mostly these blue and green size classes in the summer are the smaller phytoplankton size classes. So there were some indications of this before, but now we have really good data on this. And that means that it doesn't necessarily all go to fish. So increased productivity, all things considered, may not be a bad thing. But if it doesn't all go to fish, you may not get the expected bump in fish productivity that you might think otherwise. Similarly, we've got large zooplankton. Some of them are showing these increasing trends. Cnidaria are the gelatinous zooplankton, and euphausiids are the are krill, and they are both increasing over the long term in the mid-Atlantic, and we're not quite sure how to tell you whether that's a risk or not, but it is a change. Similarly, we see this sort of alternating between large and small copepod abundance. And so this is basically your calanus copepods that right whales favor, and a lot of other forage fish in the species tend to change back and forth with the smaller bodied ones. The last year we did see more large copepods, but basically this is the sort of thing we need to keep monitoring because we're not sure what this means, but it does mean the system is changing. So again, that accounts for the low to moderate ranking, which is unchanged. We have some other new indicators that we're trying to get at the forage base here. And so one of them is a plankton-based forage anomaly time series, which isn't really long enough to do our time series trends on, but it doesn't really look like a trend. What it is showing is a lot of variability over time. So that's something to keep an eye on. And forage fish energy density is being measured each year, and we're getting more and more good information on that. So I think we reported last year, Atlantic herring energy density, they all vary by year and season, but Atlantic herring's a lot less energy dense It's a lot less fatty than it used to be, according to these measurements in the 80s and 90s. So that's something that affects things that eat herring. Some of the other species are right there at the same measurements that they were in the 80s and 90s. So these fluctuating conditions are affecting prey for forage species, and they're affecting their abundance and their energy content. And so here's again multiple drivers of what's going on, but we're keeping track of this for you and hoping to be able to hone in on it with this analysis of fish condition. So this we have shown before, where fish were generally in good condition in the up to 2000 and were generally skinnier in the 2000 to 2010 range, and now are sort of a mix, with some species being kind of fatter and some skinnier for their length. And so when you see lots of species doing the same thing, it does suggest an ecosystem driver, not an individual species driver. And there's an analysis in progress right now by many folks here at the center that's led by Laurel Smith. And it's looking at these drivers of fish condition, everything from the phytoplankton and zooplankton to the temperatures, and how does that affect fish condition? How does stock biomass interact with that, and stomach fullness? And we are hoping to connect this to market prices and fish productivity in future years. Her preliminary results are showing, again, different drivers for different species. Fishing pressure and stock size seem to affect the redfish, butterfish, and winter flounder, whereas weakfish, windowpane flounder, and American plaice are more affected by the bottom temperature and the zooplankton. So we are trying to tease this apart, even though it's kind of a complex story, and please stay tuned for more on that. Ecosystem structure. You already have a risk element for this, which is distribution shift, and we did go over that indicator in the very beginning of the talk. That is unchanged right now and does come out of the 2016 climate vulnerability analysis. There is more information here, though, and there's also information on diversity, as I showed, and also predators. So it's possible the council could add more elements if they wanted to on ecosystem structural risks. I think what we're seeing with predators here with this new shark data is the council and the public had asked whether we'd been seeing an increase in sharks. And I think you can see maybe if you squint that now there's maybe a little bit more than we were seeing in the observer data back in 2010, but I wouldn't call this a significant trend. There's other data sources we can look at, though. We're also seeing from the pelagic observer program, basically flattish trends for a lot of the large coastal sharks, but there, again, are other surveys that we can look at. Right now, it doesn't look like there's a trend in shark populations, but we know there's a trend in gray seal populations. They are increasing at 4% per year in Canada. And the Canada's population and the US population are linked to each other. The number of pupping sites in the US has increased from 1 to 9 over the last couple of decades. And these are important predators in the system. They're generalists, though, so they eat more than 30 different prey species. And the ones that seem to predominate are the hakes, red, white, and silver hake, sand lance, yellowtail flounder, four-spotted flounder, Gulf Stream flounder, haddock, herring, redfish, and squids. So there's ongoing work at the center that we will report on as soon as we have the results of different diets for harbor and gray seals to give you more information on their effects as predators in the ecosystem. But right now, what you can think is that the implications are that a stable predator population is suggesting stable predation pressure, and an increasing predator population is reflecting increasing predation pressure. Also suggests that there probably is enough food out there to support the increasing predator population. So more on that in the future. The other new analysis I want to call your attention to here is the habitat climate vulnerability analysis that's just recently been completed. And this is a real opportunity to refine the habitat risks that are included in the council's risk analysis. So what's been done here is the climate sensitive habitats are along the top. So mid-Atlantic native salt marsh and marine estuary and intertidal reef are considered very highly vulnerable climate vulnerable habitats. In orange is highly vulnerable, etc. And they've been linked to the highly vulnerable species here and life stages. So we can just go to black sea bass, for example. You can see that black sea bass is moderate to highly vulnerable to climate, according to the climate vulnerability analysis for the species. And it does occupy some of these very highly vulnerable habitats, according to the habitat vulnerability analysis, and also some highly vulnerable ones, and some it is not in some of these less so ones. So I think what the opportunity here is to be able to take some of your species, in particular here's summer flounder, wasn't considered super highly, is low to moderate climate vulnerability, but it is highly linked to this mid-Atlantic native salt marsh, which is a highly vulnerable habitat. So this gives us the opportunity to really hone in on some of these risks, and there's some example species narratives in your risk assessment document for you to review. So climate change and managed species can be linked. So it's not just the climate indicators, it's what effect does it have on the species, and the risk elements, like I said, are unchanged. So, and these do come from the climate vulnerability analysis done in 2016. But in the State of the Ecosystem report, there's some narrative that shows how, for instance, the Chesapeake Bay's warm winter and low freshwater flow affected striped bass and blue crab differently. So poor recruitment for striped bass, but maybe better overwinter survival for blue crab. Ocean acidification impact on shellfish growth is really important in the mid-Atlantic. As we've seen, the surf clams are in there among the species, driving both landings and revenue, and they are vulnerable to increased temperature and acidification. We did see these areas of low pH, and the lab work in progress is suggesting that we're not yet at the threshold for growth, but now that we know there is a threshold, we can really monitor that. Similarly, the shifting species distributions, obviously the council knows a lot about this and it's already affecting a lot of the things that you do, but we do have most of the species, at least moderate to highly vulnerable to species distribution shifts. We're already seeing them. Here's the map for black sea bass. And this affects, of course, spatial allocations and bycatch measures and every interactions with protected species. So the last section is on offshore wind development. And this is your other ocean use element. We have not changed any of the rankings yet, but I think with the new information would give us the opportunity to do so. So the indicators here are the development timeline, how much revenue is in the proposed lease areas, and the survey overlap, which is really small to show on this slide, but you can see the full map at this link if you're looking at the presentation yourself. So the main message here is that there's going to be a very rapid increase in offshore wind in the acreage that's covered by offshore wind if all of these proposed projects actually happen. Very quickly by 2029, it'll be quite high. The fishery revenue in these areas is many of the species that Mid-Atlantic manages have important revenue coming from these areas. This isn't to say that the revenue will go away. It's that it would be possibly displaced and would occur somewhere else. And this displacement has other potential impacts on meeting your fishery management objectives. And a lot of these surveys overlap quite a bit with the wind areas. And so there's a lot of work going on right now to figure out how the surveys need to be modified or adjusted in order to keep bringing in the scientific data to assess things like climate change and the species if the survey vessels and other instruments aren't able to go into the wind areas. So there's these plans for rapid build out in a patchwork of areas. So the impacts will be really different across the region, and 2 to 24% of total average revenue for some major species could be displaced. And again, I said this already, the displacement can alter fishing methods, which can change habitat and species and fleet interactions. Right whales, there's a concern, could be displaced from some of these areas, and the altered local oceanography from the turbine placement could also affect the distribution of their zooplankton prey. And of course, the data collection surveys are really important to management decision-making, and hopefully we can figure out a way to keep them going and not have increased uncertainty. So here's your updated risk assessment. And again, we've gone over what has changed and what hasn't, but it's just summarized here. In this table on species level risk, the only thing that's changed is butterfish B status has increased from green to yellow. There haven't been any changes to ecosystem level risk elements, but we discussed there's a lot of new data if you wanted to hone in on those further. And Brandon and staff updated several of the species and sector level risk elements. So the allocation risk decreased in this table for 4 species from high to low. Last year we had applied intermediate rankings, but I think we realized that that wasn't really how the council intended to use it. So they were reduced to lowest. And the black sea bass regulatory complexity risk also decreased from highest to moderate high. So again, 50 people contributed to this. There's many thanks to all of them. There's a lot more data that's online. We can show you, if you want, the EcoData R package is available for people who want the data. There's a lot of visualizations. The reports are on the web, as well as the technical documentation. We are drafting what we're calling an indicator catalog that will have even more information that could be available for council staff use and others who want to do a deeper dive into some of this information that we couldn't necessarily include in the report. And I will stop there so that if we appreciate any feedback on the structure, on the themes, on any of the points in the memo, and in particular, any of your priorities for next year and for updating the risk assessment. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm always so impressed each year when you give this report. You know, I think the visual element for me is a game changer because that's just the way that I learn. When I read a paragraph, it's different from seeing the images. It's an amazing amount of work, and I just want to thank you and the rest of the folks. I think you said there were 50 people who participated in this effort. So just thank you very much for your report. I'm going to go now to the council to see if anybody has any thoughts or comments that they want to provide. I have Dewey Hemmelwright with his hand up. Go ahead, Dewey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Sarah, thank you for the presentation. Could you go back to your slide on sharks, HMS, please? And my question would be, that data come from the observer program, correct?
Sorry, I had to find my unmute button. So yes, the top one is coming from the observer program run here out of the center, and the bottom one is coming from the pelagic shark observer program run out of the HMS at headquarters.
And something to point out here, there was a gear modification change to circle hooks. I can't even remember when it was, 2006 or something like that. And the use of lighter mono. And so is there any way to incorporate the bite offs that's observed from the observers, or do they record that? Because we used to sit, the industry used to sit back in the mid 2000s, 10 million hooks, and we're probably down to less than 5 million now. So I'm not sure how much you read into this that, there's no trend in sharks.
That's a fair question. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, according to a few of these things, because a lighter mono, the shark's gonna bite through it. So I'm just curious about, there's been some gear modifications, some different things that's happened over time, but before somebody talks about the trends and stuff like that. I just wanted to add that in. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate that comment. And this is the first time we're showing this information. So we can certainly go back and look. The data provided by HMS they may have already accounted for that, but I will have to go back and check because I don't know. And so it's an excellent point. And like I said, we're already in discussions with VIMS and others to try to include some of the other surveys for sharks to get a better handle on some of the trends. So thank you very much for that comment.
Yeah, thanks, Dewey. Appreciate that. Let me see who we have up. Chris Batsavage, you're up next, and then Michelle Duvall. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Sarah, for the excellent and informative presentation and report. Looking at, again, notice the recreational fishery indicators in this report, and it's interesting, to point out just the lack of the less diversity with a lot of with more shore fishing. And I know in the past I asked about just what could be causing like that dip in effort that we saw in 2018. But then thinking about the estuarine condition indicators that you have with salinity and temperature for the Chesapeake Bay, and was wondering if those two might be linked a little bit, where you have a lot of fishing effort in the estuarine waters and nearshore ocean waters, both private boat anglers and shore, and the estuarine conditions can maybe a factor in terms of catchability and availability of fish for a lot of these a lot of the anglers, kind of beyond the long-term effects as far as like year class strengths and things like that, but just whether or not certain species of fish are available in the Chesapeake Bay due to salinity, for instance, or other estuarine areas. I was wondering if if there might be a link to that, as and kind of looking at what's already in this report as opposed to adding more things. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. An excellent question. And I'm only showing the temperature here, but we did get a contribution on salinity and dissolved oxygen and other conditions in the Chesapeake Bay that I couldn't put it all in because of time. So that's a really excellent question. And we did have also some reports from fishers in the area talking about changes in availability, fish actually being maybe more near shore this year. I'd have to go back and look. And also the NEOMAP survey saw quite a bit more summer flounder this year than they did last fall, which, it's not the type of thing their population could do overall. So that does indicate maybe more availability in shore, at least where they were surveying. So that is something we could probably look at. And I really like the way that would also link up some of these indicators. So thank you for that comment, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks for that for those thoughts. Let's see who we have next. Michelle Duvall. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Sarah. I'm one of the people who's newer to this presentation, and I really loved it, and I agree with what Mike said about the visuals. I think those are fantastic, and it's just this really, I think the report it's just a really amazing little information sausage. But my question had to do more with I like the ecosystem overfishing indicators, and I think you all noted that while landings are declining, that the catches are being sustained by a lower proportion of the ecosystem's primary production than in the past. And I was wondering, I thought I saw in there somewhere maybe a change in the composition of primary producers, and maybe that might have something to do with that. So while primary production is somewhat stable, you're having this decrease in landings, and I just didn't know if you had any further thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you. That is a really excellent question. So I think what I was showing in this, at least just in the presentation, was the sort of seasonal change in the large to small size classes of phytoplankton that does change the sort of which energy pathways that production could go through. And so that increase in summer production does seem to be maybe from these smaller cells. What we don't have in the report yet, but is being worked on, is a time series of that. So what I can't answer yet is, so you're seeing this total primary production required. And I think that at present, the index is using total primary production, isn't really looking at sort of what kind of cells that's coming from yet. We're hoping in the future to be able to break that down so that we'll know, say, has there been an increase over time in, say, the number of small or the number of larger cells, and what does that imply for where it goes through the food web? So, like I said, a really excellent question, and we're not quite there yet with it, but we're working towards it, and would certainly appreciate any other comments. Also, the trophic level of the fish in the landings also affects this. So if you're catching a lot more fish that are lower in the trophic levels rather than higher in the trophic levels, it actually requires less primary production. So there's that in the mix too. And there's some other things that we already look at that, and you can see that in the detailed documentation, but there's probably better ways to measure that as well. So this could get a lot more intricate if we tried, and we are looking at some of these details. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Sarah, for that. I've got a couple hands from staff. Go ahead, Jose.
Sarah, great presentation. Thank you very much. I have a regarding the changes in revenues. There was at one point you indicated that perhaps there are market forces that are influencing those changes in revenues, and I was wondering if that was further explored. And what came to mind, and I don't know if this is possible or not, but what came to mind are changes, for example, in per capita seafood consumption, or perhaps changes in the imports of edible and non-edible products, as well as changes in exports of seafood. So I was wondering if by any chance that was further assessed.
Thank you for the question. I think these are things that are on the radar screen, but maybe not available for us to get the full data sets on. So yeah, I think it's for sure acknowledged that a lot of the markets are affected by these basically international changes and in prices and exports and availability of alternatives, et cetera. And so it can be really complicated. And yes, we have not evaluated that here. I think we got to market dynamics because the other things were not obviously driving this. So I think it would take a lot more exploration to look at that, which, you know, doesn't mean we can't, but there's a lot in there. And so we may be able to get at things like changes in per capita seafood production in the United States, or I don't know what our regional data looks like on that, and I would have to leave that to other experts. But any other thoughts you have for what you'd like to look us to look into here, we'd be happy to consider that. And I know one thing we're looking at for next year is in terms of management, you could also look at the amount of your how your landings compared to your actual total allowable catch, and that can tell you whether you're, you know, if the landings are more driven by the market than the TAC, then that's another hint. And so we may be able to pull that together as well. So I'm not sure I've really answered your question, but I do appreciate the insight. And yeah, we'd love to talk further about that. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Brandon, I see your hand. Do you have a question for Sarah or a comment?
Yeah, no questions, but thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to weigh in since it seemed like the council members' comments were slowing down, and so I just wanted to offer my thanks to Sarah and everybody that works on the State of the Ecosystem report. They're nice enough to invite me into all of their meetings, and so I try to provide, you know, as much input from the council perspective as I can. And I think what they've done has been truly amazing about how the report has changed over the years and how receptive they are to your feedback to make this as useful to you all as it can be. So just, you know, going beyond just providing you indicators this year to try to dive in to tell the story of what might be driving some of these indicators, I think is really critical for you all to try to understand more of what's going on within the ecosystem. And so I think, you know, the report has changed a lot over the last 4 or 5 years as she has presented it. And so, you know, just wanted to get a sense from you all if we're on the right track. You know, the feedback that you and Michelle gave on the visuals is really helpful as we think about how to present this in a meaningful way to you all, because that's why we're putting this, you know, why they're spending all this time putting and investing all of this work is to make it meaningful to you. This is why we give it to you early in the year so that you have this kind of information as you're thinking about your decisions throughout the year. It's why we put the risk assessment at this time so that you have that sort of cheat sheet of that table with all of the green, you know, yellows, oranges, and reds to be thinking about. So I just wanted to thank her for that, and sort of any sort of ideas and thoughts you may have, certainly feel free to reach out to me after the meeting or to Sarah, and I can relay those as I continue to help them develop this report, because we're really trying to operationalize. You know, I think you'll hear from Paul tomorrow, as this was talked about at the SSC meeting, thinking about how we can really, you know, go beyond just presenting this information to the council, but how can the SSC, how can staff utilize this information more in our day-to-day activities? And then just lastly, you know, Sarah had mentioned a number of areas here. We have new or different information to inform our risk assessment. And so I talked about this yesterday a little bit. We developed the risk assessment for the first time back in 2017. So we have 5 years now of our risk assessment, and maybe we could, you know, one of my recommendations, and you'll see it later in the year, would be that maybe we take a deeper dive. We get the EOP together next year and re-look at our risk assessment. Are there new risk indicators we want to look at? We have new information to sort of we put some indicators on the shelf because the council wasn't ready yet to pull them out because maybe we didn't have the data to evaluate them the right way. But maybe there's new indicators you all want to be looking at. And so maybe it's time to after we're done with the management strategy evaluation, but maybe it's time next year to really look at our risk assessment and how we want to reevaluate all the different indicators that we have. So I just want to throw that out there for you all to be thinking about as we move throughout the year. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. I appreciate that. And I'll be honest with you, like listening to that presentation I feel like I ran about 5 miles. Like I'm like almost out of breath just from listening to the presentation. There's a ton of work that's gone into this. And I think sometimes it takes a little bit of time for council members to digest all of that information. And so I appreciate your willingness to take comments after the fact today, when folks maybe have a little bit of extra time to dive in. So between you and Sarah, this is it's a tremendous amount of work, and I do want to just thank all of the people. I don't know how many people that contributed or on the call today, but it's a tremendous amount of work, and it's very helpful and very very good for our council to have this in front of them as we're making decisions. So Sarah, I just want to also applaud you just for your wealth of knowledge and to be able to kind of grasp the you just have such a balance with your presentation and with your understanding of all of this. It's always really good to get this presentation from you. Let me see. Let me bring up my list here. Does anyone else from the council have anything that they want to ask either Brandon or Sarah regarding the presentation? Okay, I don't see any hands from council members, so I'm going to go to the public real quick. We're a little bit over time, but I think our next topic may not take as long as it was planned. So let me go to Mr. Fletcher. Go ahead, James. You're up.
I have a couple of questions in your acidity thing. Is it possible that we're overlooking the man-made chemicals coming out of the Delaware Bay, Chesapeake Bay, rivers in New York, and mainly the St. Lawrence Seaway? If they had the same position as the Gulf of Mexico, would there be a dead zone off of there? And is that what's driving what you're calling ocean acidity? Are the chemicals coming out of the rivers? That's one question. And on the other question, on the economics and the prices, does management, because we have closed seasons, run the price of our product higher and thereby open a market share for imports? Has that been done intentionally? The question is, do our closed seasons create a market share for imports? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I'll do my best to answer, but I'm not sure I can answer the second one for sure. But I'll go with for the first one. I think the ocean acidification is separate from the sort of chemical and nutrient inputs, and I think we can look for data on those, although it's just a bit more sparse. And so I can go back and ask what sort of information we have on that. In terms of the closed seasons, sort of creating opportunities for imports, that's really not my area of expertise, but I can for sure bring that question back to our economists and see what they think about that. So sorry for not having any answer on that right now.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. I appreciate that. And every time I say Sarah, my Siri on my iPad wants to ask me questions about what I'm looking for. So sorry for the delay between. I'm trying to. I keep turning it off. Let's see. Does anyone else from the council have anything they want to offer at this time? Is there anyone else from the public? Michelle Duvall, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just really quick, I also wanted to just say, express my appreciation for all of the information on offshore wind energy and the indicators there. I think you'd mentioned that this was something, or I thought I saw in the memo that this was something new that was added. So I think that's extremely helpful, and I really like the way that the graphics were constructed on that. I think that's incredibly helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge all the regional office folks who contributed to those graphics. They did an incredible job. So I agree with that.
Yeah, I have to say that's the biggest thing for me. I mean, just to be able to see what it is see the data in the graphics that are being put out there in this report is it's incredible. You guys have done an incredible amount of work. I don't see any other hands at this point. So Sarah, thank you very much for your report, and hopefully you got a little bit of feedback that we can use to better the report for next time. But thanks again. Thanks very much for your
Thank you
time.
for your
and
attention. We
yeah,
really appreciate the feedback, and we absolutely welcome it anytime. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
yeah, thank you so much. Okay, we have 3:17. I want to take a 5-minute break. I need a couple minutes, and we'll come back. Let's come back in 5 minutes, and we're gonna take up our last topic for today's discussion on East Coast Climate Change Scenario Planning Initiative. Kylie is going to give us a presentation, so we'll see you back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. It's 3:25, so I think it's time to start up the last agenda item that we have on our list for today. Kylie Dancy with the council staff is going to give us a presentation on the East Coast Climate Change Scenario Planning Initiative. Kylie, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and get started. I see it on my screen, so you're good to go.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So let me get my slide advancing right here. So today I'll be providing an update to the Council on the East Coast Climate Change Scenario Planning Initiative. So this is mostly an informational update with no Council action needed, although any feedback from the Council on any of this is appreciated. I plan to share where we are with this process and where we're likely headed, but most of this is subject to further review and approval by the NRCC, which is scheduled to meet in late May. So I'll cover a recap of the NRCC's initiation of this project, a brief review of what scenario planning is, and give an overview of our draft proposed process, and then touch on next steps. So the NRCC first agreed to explore a scenario planning process in late 2019 to address governance issues related to shifting stocks and climate change. At that meeting, they agreed to form a working group to further explore and plan for a potential process. This working group formed in early 2020 with staff representatives from each member organization, and in addition, the South Atlantic Council, which was interested in participating in this process as well. The NRCC then met to review the working group recommendations in July of 2020, but at that time decided to go back to each organization to get further clarity on each organization's priorities and their available resources to participate. So the NRCC met again in November 2020 to revisit the working group recommendations, and at that point agreed to move forward with an East Coast initiative with all member organizations, plus the South Atlantic Council participating. So for this process, the NRCC, with the addition of a South Atlantic representative, will serve as the primary decision-making body, although as we'll discuss later, we will be regularly updating and involving the councils in the commission and their stakeholders. So I have a few slides with a review of what scenario planning is in a general high-level sense. This council received a scenario planning 101 type of presentation last April, but at this point, I think a reminder is probably needed. So what is scenario planning? This definition is from the National Park Service Handbook for using scenarios to explore climate change. That was published in 2013. That describes scenario planning as a tool that managers can use to test decisions or develop strategy in a context of uncontrollable and uncertain environmental, social, political, economic, or technical factors. So this type of process, scenario planning, has a long history with applications in the military as well as fossil fuel industry planning, but in recent years, it's become more commonly used for natural resource planning in the face of climate change. And this is a process that lends itself really well to that type of application. Since there are so many factors that are unpredictable and outside of our control when we think about natural resource management related to climate change and a changing socio-political environment. Scenario planning is essentially the creation of a set of stories or scenarios under different assumptions of future conditions that can help inform our planning and strategy today. So it's designed to provide a structured process for managers to explore and describe multiple plausible futures, and then to consider how to best adapt and respond to those possible futures. These scenarios are typically created in response to a focal question developed based on a major strategic challenge that's faced by an organization. This allows for explicit consideration of uncertainty in future conditions, but it is not a tool for predicting or forecasting. It is a tool for allowing us to think about plausible combinations of future conditions. And the process does not have to be data intensive in the same way that an MSE may have to be data intensive. How is scenario planning used? So essentially, managers can use the resulting scenarios from this process to strategize and prioritize for the future, and that includes near-term actions to take or avoid now that could allow for better adaptation to future possible conditions. Specifically, it's helpful to plan for actions that we could take now that would be likely to be beneficial under a range of different possible future conditions. And it's also helpful to identify actions to avoid that may reduce our flexibility or increase the difficulty of adapting to future conditions. And it can also provide insights into data gaps and monitoring needs for changing conditions. So a couple benefits of this type of process in particular. First, it helps managers and stakeholders explore their underlying assumptions and perceptions about future conditions, which might be different among different groups. It does reduce the tendency for managers to become overconfident in expectations of future conditions or too focused on a limited view of the future or paralyzed by uncertainty. And then scenario thinking also provides a way to organize complex information about changing conditions and is a way to stimulate creative and innovative thinking about how to prepare for change. So in terms of how the scenarios are developed, this is often done at a workshop or some other participatory format. There are several different methods for creating different scenarios, but a typical and a relatively common and simple method is using this 2x2 matrix process. So this method considers two different really important, critical, and uncertain driving forces that present a spectrum of uncertainty. And ideally, those different uncertainties are from separate categories of drivers, such as one social political and one ecological. And overlapping these two spectrums of uncertainty produces then a matrix with 4 quadrants with 4 possible scenarios. And then the resulting scenarios that we would develop for each of those quadrants are intended to be different, plausible, relevant, challenging, and divergent stories about possible future conditions. So that's sort of a high-level basic recap of what scenario planning is, but it is recognized that we will likely need some more thorough introduction to scenario planning for participating management groups and stakeholders as we go through our initial scoping phase of this project, since this is a new and unfamiliar process for most of us. So at this point, the core team has talked a little bit about this. We're not exactly sure what format that would take, but there is recognition that there could be some sort of set of webinars or introductory video or something along those lines to provide a more solid foundation in the concepts of scenario planning for participating organizations and stakeholders. There are a few good resources on scenario planning available at a webpage that we recently created for this initiative on our council's website, shown at the link here. There are 2 especially good overview documents, including that National Park Service manual I mentioned earlier, and there is also a recent NIMS publication titled Scenario Planning and an Introduction for Fisheries Managers. So both of those are good resources if you'd like more basic information on how this process might work. Also, the Pacific Fishery Management Council is currently in the end stages of a climate change scenario planning initiative of their own, and they have produced a number of great documents, including a report on the scenarios that they developed at a January 2020 workshop. So now I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of a tentative plan for this East Coast process, starting with the core team. So the core team for this process has been identified by the NRCC and will serve as the primary technical team working in coordination with a process facilitator to conduct most of the research, planning, coordination, and producing materials for various points in the process. This would be sort of similar to an FMAT or a plan development team in the council processes. The core team has met once so far on March 11th, and a summary of that meeting is included in the briefing materials for this discussion. The representatives for each organization are listed in this table, although it is possible that the NRCC may add more members if the need arises for additional expertise. And in fact, the core team at our last meeting recommended potentially adding someone from the Southeast Fisheries Science Center and a representative from NIMS headquarters. So for facilitation, the NRCC and the core team were both supportive of hiring an experienced facilitator to guide us through this process. So the facilitator would be responsible for a lot of the planning and coordination with the core team, as well as preparation for and facilitation of the meetings and workshops related to this initiative. So we do have a contract for a facilitator that's currently in development. Basically, we're in the process of trying to identify and finalize a contract for a facilitator. We hope to have this done soon, given that the core team, as the core teams noted, a lot of the further planning and development of objectives and other elements of this process should be informed by discussions with a facilitator. So one of the first big steps in this process would be defining the objectives and the focal question of the scenario planning initiative more specifically. The general topic that's been identified by the NRCC is management and governance issues related to climate-driven changes in the fisheries, particularly changing stock distribution. It will be helpful to identify more specifically exactly what questions we're trying to address in order to get the most useful stakeholder input and to design scenarios that will really be helpful to these organizations in thinking about long-term strategies and priorities related to climate-driven changes in the fisheries. So the specific objectives and questions will be further developed and discussed by the core team with the facilitator and the NRCC. And then the core team at our recent meeting suggested that we might develop draft objectives for consideration by the NRCC, but also recommended that even after NRCC review, it would be wise to leave those objectives as draft throughout a public scoping process to get feedback from each organization and their stakeholders on the specific objectives of this process. So another element that we expect to further clarify in the initial stages of this process are the expected outcomes and applications of this process. So we know that scenario planning has a lot of potential benefits, but we want to make sure we're really clear about exactly what we expect out of this process for the benefit of all the participants. So the core team will work with the facilitator and the NRCC to further clarify exactly what we expect out of this process and the benefits of this process as we think about applying this to the East Coast. Some general possibilities that the core team sees for outcomes include a list of near-term and longer-term broader management priorities that might be robust to a variety of future conditions, as well as a list of actions to avoid that reduce our flexibility to adapt. Given the scale of this initiative, these are likely to be broader strategic goals, and we don't anticipate at this time that they would be at the level of specific FMP level proposed management changes, although some of the strategies might be more applicable to some FMPs than others for example, strategies for better dealing with joint management. So we also hope to better understand the limitations of our current systems for responding to change. We'd also expect general policy recommendations for governance improvements. And in addition, it's likely that we will identify data gaps, research needs, and monitoring needs related to adapting to changing fishery conditions. This slide summarizes the general tentative plan for the structure and participation in this process. Again, this is subject to change and is still being discussed a little bit with the NRCC. So as previously mentioned, the NRCC plus the South Atlantic representatives will serve as the primary decision body, given the complexity and the number and scope of the different participating organizations. We do expect to regularly update the councils and the commission and seek their feedback throughout the process, and expect some level of involvement from these bodies and their stakeholders, particularly during the scoping phases and during the planned workshops. The core team has also discussed the logistics of potentially involving council and commission advisory bodies, such as the SSCs, advisory panels, and technical committees, groups like that. This is something that might be especially beneficial during the early stages of the process and during scoping and identification of key uncertainties in the fisheries. But given the number of different organizations that we would be dealing with and the number of different advisory bodies, we would have to think carefully about how to balance the helpful input that these bodies could provide with the logistical complexities of involving so many different groups. In terms of stakeholder input and involvement, this is something we're still strategizing about and we'll discuss with the facilitator and with the NRCC. The level of involvement, though, is likely to vary throughout the process, given the scale of this initiative. We're hoping to get very broad input at the outset during a scoping process, but for later stages, in particular for scenario development workshops and other smaller meetings, we're likely to have to limit participation somehow to have a productive scenario development process. It's not clear at this point how we're going to do that, but we will try to aim for balanced representation among different management groups and stakeholder interests and along the East Coast. So now I'll touch on the proposed process for this initiative, which is based on the NRCC working group recommendations from last summer, which follow the process that's outlined in the National Park Service Handbook, as well as the recent NIMS publication on scenario planning for fisheries managers. So again, while the NRCC has seen some of this proposed process in terms of working group recommendations, we are aiming to have some more focused discussion of that in May with the NRCC about whether this is the process they want to adopt. So this is still tentative at this point. Broadly, the proposed plan is to start with a public scoping process, followed by a 2-workshop model, 1 workshop for building scenarios, and then a follow-up workshop or series of workshops later on to discuss the implications and applications of the scenarios. The draft proposed process is a 6-phase process that would tentatively extend from now until next summer approximately. The first phase is orientation, which is where we are now. This is where the project objectives are established and the process and the structure for the scenario planning initiative. We have formed a core team. We're in the process of hiring a facilitator. We will also plan for a scoping process in this phase, which we hope to transition to by early summer of 2021. So phase 2 would be scoping, where we would conduct a structured outreach process to get stakeholder perspectives on key uncertainties driving changes in East Coast fisheries, as well as feedback on the project objectives. This would be expected to occur hopefully this summer. One thing that the core team emphasized at the recent meeting regarding scoping is the importance of kind of taking our time on this step and planning a well thought out process where those that are commenting are well informed on scenario planning and what we're looking for. The core team thought we needed to be sure that we set ourselves up for getting the most useful input possible, as well as ensuring that we're building stakeholder buy-in for this process and that we're providing a good introduction to the process for everyone involved. Phase 3 would be exploration, which would involve identifying and analyzing a list of key uncertainties that are driving changes in the fisheries in preparation for a first workshop. This phase is informed by the scoping comments as well as potentially additional discussions with managers and other experts. And this phase would tentatively be conducted in the fall of 2021. Phase 4 is synthesis, which is the primary scenario building phase and would involve a workshop with stakeholders to build out draft scenarios for East Coast fisheries. So this has been discussed as potentially occurring in late 2021, possibly November. After the workshop, then the details of the scenarios would be further described and validated. And then phase 5 would follow that scenario development phase and could involve one or more workshops to discuss the implications of the scenarios and to come up with management responses and recommendations. So in other words, to discuss what do we do with the insights that we gain from the scenario development process. And then finally, phase 6 is monitoring, which, depending on the outcomes of the previous phases, could involve ongoing monitoring of key indicators of change. And while actual monitoring would likely, in that case, be ongoing beyond 2022, the phase for identifying sort of a plan for monitoring would be expected to wrap up along with any other final products from the initiative by summer of 2022. So to wrap up, the next steps in this process include similar updates to be given next week at the New England Fishery Management Council meeting, as well as updates to the Commission in May and the South Atlantic Council in June. Again, we are in the process of finalizing a contract for a facilitator or developing that contract. We hope to get this facilitator involved as soon as possible with the core team to further develop the plan and the objectives for this process. And we will be holding another core team meeting prior to the NRCC meeting, which is scheduled for late May, to discuss draft objectives for this process so that we can put those in front of the NRCC in May, hopefully. The NRCC meets in late May and will review sort of the draft plan for this process that's included in the briefing materials for this discussion and review the timeline as well as consider those draft objectives. And then finally, we would work to develop a more specific plan for a scoping process to be initiated hopefully early this summer. So that's all I have. I'm happy to take any questions or any feedback on anything that's presented in this draft plan. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kylie. Can you go back to, I think it was slide 5. If you can go back to that, there was something that you said. I'll be the first to admit I'm not. I probably need to read a lot more about scenario planning, but I guess it's your bullet regarding prediction or forecast. I kind of thought that was part of the purpose, to try to think about how things might be changing in the future. I don't know if you can speak more to that. It struck me as kind of it went counter to what I was thinking this process was. I don't know if you can offer any other thoughts on what you've learned as being part of the team.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm relatively new to the scenario planning concept as well, but from what I understand, it's not necessarily a process that's going to quantitatively predict exactly where we're going to be in the future with regard to a bunch of different metrics. It's more of a qualitative exploration that's can be informed by different models or different data streams that we have that are more quantitative, but it's not necessarily that the scenario planning process itself is taking information and putting it into some kind of model that spits out, here's exactly where we might be in the future. It's more of a dialogue with stakeholders to review the available information that we have, including quantitative and qualitative information, and then have more of a discussion about, given all of this information, where do we think we're going to be? What do we think are plausible combinations of different factors that we might be facing in the future? And what we focus on is as the most important driving uncertainties in this process are kind of up to the participants in the workshop. As you know, as we go through the scenario building process and as we get feedback from scoping, we will get more feedback on what participants, stakeholders, managers think are the most important driving forces, and then we'll sort of have a discussion about what exactly we expect changes in those driving forces to look to what we expect the fisheries to look like as a result of those changes. So that's sort of a long-winded way of saying we can use different sources of information that include predictions and forecasts, but I think overall the process is not intended to precisely predict future conditions.
I understand. Okay. Yeah, because one of the conversations, I mean, I've had plenty of them over time. I had it, Malin Pinsky and I were on a call, just in talking about climate change and scenarios to the future. And one of the things that I thought was something that was going to be very helpful, and critical to management in the future is to try to come up with some form of prediction as to what the likelihood of change is, so that we can plan instead of, so we can, maybe it's not a forecast, but it's, instead of being reactive, we're going to be proactive. I guess that's maybe the easiest way to say it. But I see what you're saying, and yeah, I mean, this is new to me. I definitely have a lot to learn, but I appreciate your presentation and your time spent, providing that to the council. Let me bring up my list of participants. Does anybody? And I'm sorry, guys, I have a little bit of a cold. I'm got a little stuffy nose. Let me see if anybody has any questions. I'll go to Brandon and then Michelle. Go ahead, Brandon.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and sorry to jump in before council. I just wanted to respond to your question. And so I think there are two different things. So my report yesterday talked about one of the projects that we are engaged in with Malin, specifically doing exactly what you're talking about, is developing quantitative models to predict these short-term distribution shifts because of climate change. And so we're looking at summer flounder, squid, dogfish, and gray triggerfish. So thinking about something from the South Atlantic that may be moving into the Mid-Atlantic. So we are looking into that, and can we develop models that are predictive in the short term, and thinking about distribution shifts, where what Kylie in this scenario planning process is thinking more broadly than that. It's not, I think it's thinking about the future management structure and how you're going to think about things as we have these predictive models, to be thinking about how species may be moving around. How do we as management then sort of address those shifting fisheries? And so they're complementary, but they are a different approach in terms of how we deal with those things. So I just wanted to bring that point up in terms of what we talked about yesterday too.
Yeah. No, I think it's good. Trying to put it all together, in my mind, they're this. It's one and the same, but you make a good point, and they can be different, obviously different approaches. So thanks for that, Brandon. I appreciate it. Michelle, I think I had you next. I'll bring up my list. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I think Brandon said it. I was just gonna, say something very similar, that it seems like, the project with Dr. Pinsky, it complements this effort, and, depending on the timing, there may be, some, efforts and things that project is considering that could help, inform this scenario planning effort as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point. I think that's good for clarification. It may be, yes, maybe it can help inform, but it's not one and the same. So I get your point, and I appreciate the reminder from the discussion that we had yesterday. There was a lot going on yesterday. And so let's see who I have here. Does anybody else from the council have any questions they want to ask of Kylie regarding the presentation? Okay, I don't see any hands from council members. Anyone from the public, from the audience, have any questions for Kylie? Okay, I don't see any hands raised at this time. So I'm bringing it back up for a second. So thank you, Kylie, for your presentation. Yeah, I just want to reiterate that, you know, this is new to a lot of us, and I'm looking forward to working with staff and other members of the council and the public in moving forward with this initiative. I think and with the NRCC, I think it's going to be a good project that will help inform management for the future. So thanks for your time and efforts in putting together your presentation today. Is there anything else that we need to bring up at this time, Kylie?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Okay, with that said, that adjourns our meeting for today. So we'll go ahead and close the meeting. Let's see, it's almost 4 o'clock. Puts us right on time. We will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And I hope everybody has a nice evening. And I'll talk to all of you tomorrow morning. So the meeting's adjourned for today. Thank you.